All right, everybody, welcome back to Bio 20. This is Mr. Lau, and we are finishing up Chapter 5 for our Evolution Unit, Chapter 4 and 5. Okay, so this is going to correspond to page 157 to 161 of the Nelson Biology textbook. Okay, oh, by the way, if it sounds like my voice or my speaking is very different, or I have like a weird lisp or whatever, like I said before on Google Classroom, I got one of my teeth removed, and now I have a fake tooth that's attached to like some sort of retainer-esque plastic thing on the top of my mouth, and everything sucks. And no, it's fine. It's honestly fine. Not a big deal. You don't even care. It's fine. So yeah, if I just sound a little bit different, that is why. Please ignore it. Okay. These are the curricular outcomes. Oh, I forgot to put in the key questions. Oops. I'll put in the key questions afterwards, and I attached them online as usual, okay? But I guess, like, the key questions are related to the curricular outcomes. Like, you have to be able to explain what speciation is and the conditions required. You should also be able to describe some evolutionary theories, like, oh, what is punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism? What is some other things like divergent versus convergent evolution? But we'll get into that later on. I gotta fix that later. Oops. Alright, so let's get started. This is going to be slide number 4, 5.6, speciation and evolution. So what is the term a speciation, and how can we use it when we're discussing evolutionary biology? That is going to be the formation of new species. How do a new species come out? It's called speciation. Now, as a reminder, what are species actually? We actually already touched upon this a little bit in 5.1 and 5.2, I believe, when we were talking about the taxonomy of certain organisms, like, oh, family, genus, species, etc. You know, Danish King Philip comes over for green spinach, you know, that stuff. So, what are species? These are going to be populations of individuals who are reproductively isolated. They cannot breed with each other under natural conditions, all right? So, this is a picture of 3 different species of fish. Even though they're all fish, because they are different species, they cannot actually breed with one another, create fertile eggs, or create fertile fish offspring. So, if they cannot breed with one another, they are going to be part of a different species. Even if they're in the same genus, they cannot breed. Alright, so another example could be these 2 different species of dolphins, okay? Even though, again, they are both dolphins, they are different species, so they would not be able to reproductively mate and create offspring. A more modern example, a review, okay, again, what is a genus? Okay, they are a level of taxonomy in the taxonomic system, okay, and these are all different felines that are part of the same genus, but they are different species, okay. Over here, we have 3 different cats that are actually all the same species, except different subspecies, okay. So, when we take a look at the taxonomic groups, we can say, oh, cougars, okay, and ocelots over here, they cannot interbreed with one another and produce fertile offspring. However, over here, these 3 house cats are all part of the same species, and they can interbreed and can produce a fertile offspring, and that's also how we get different breeds of dogs as well. Over here, you might see this from Minecraft, but when you have a horse and a donkey mate, they create something called a mule, and the mule actually has a odd number of chromosomes, because take a look, a horse, when it has 64 chromosomes, a donkey has 62 chromosomes, okay? And when they mate, they actually create a mule that has 63 chromosomes. Recall from last week that when you create sex cells, okay, they have half the number of chromosomes that you do, okay? So, half of 62 would be 31, half of 64 would be 32. What is half of 63? It's 31.5, but because that's not a whole number of chromosomes, those sex cells are actually not able to properly combine or be produced. Then they're going to be, or the mules, therefore, are going to be what we would call infertile. They cannot reproduce, and then they're just going to be the last line of their lineage there. And I think I want to say a stat that I read from Wikipedia was like in 2002, the total number of mules that actually reproduced with other animals, like other donkeys or horses, was like 50 since 1527. So not exactly a large number, okay? So yeah, they're usually infertile. All right. So that is what a species is, a lot of review there, okay? Now, how does speciation actually happen? So in Bio 20, we're going to talk about one method. In Bio 30, you're going to talk about 3 more, if I recall correctly. So the first one, or the one that we're going to be discussing in Bio 20 is going to be called allopatric speciation, okay? What is allopatric speciation? So this is going to be one called, or this is going to be related to isolation, okay? Physical or geographic isolation of the different groups, and then that's what's going to cause a speciation in 3 main parts. Okay, so let's take a look. So the first part of allopatric speciation says there's going to be a physical barrier that separates the two, that separates a single interbreeding population into 2 or more groups, and you can see that on the bottom here. Now, why is that important? Well, if they are isolated from one another, okay, any mutations, which you might remember from last week, any mutations that occur in these groups are separate and not going to be shared with one another. As you can see over here, these brownish bugs, they are geographically isolated from one another. What happens? Then you start getting some green mutations here, okay? Are those mutations shared with the other group over here? No, they are not. Why? Because they are geographically separated by these physical barriers, okay? These physical barriers can be mountain ranges, oceans, river channels, canyons, dams, canals, etc. So again, once these mutations happen in one population, they're just going to stay in that population and spread within that one population as these individuals breed more and more with each other. Then, after a while, what happens? Over time, those mutations are going to be spread out, and the entire population will get parts of those mutations like that. Now, why did I include a picture of the Galapagos Islands? Okay, well, that's going to be a part of a test question later on, but you might want to think about some of the things that we said on this page. Isolated from one another, physical barriers, examples of physical barriers. Why would the Galapagos Islands and Darwin's finches relate to that? Let's take a look at the next one. Oh, sorry, this is just a bigger picture of allopatric speciation using those bugs. If you didn't see it in the other one, you can see it in this one. I think this would be good if you print out these notes. That way, this smaller picture is bigger on this slide here. So again, reproductive isolation. You cut this group in half, you isolate them from one another, and then they only reproduce with one another, and eventually they become a new species. All right. So part 2, why does allopatric speciation or reproductive isolation occur? It's because also, number 2, natural selection, which we learned about in the past few weeks, works on the different groups independently. Especially if, for example, in this picture, you have one part of the geography that's much different, like a top of a mountain range, versus the bottom of that geographic area, which is the valleys and the forests below the mountains, okay? So because of the differences in the environment, you're going to have different advantageous traits, and different advantageous traits means that natural selection is going to be different in those 2 separate populations. After a while, those differences, the natural selection is going to cause certain traits to be selected for, and then certain traits are going to be inherited over many, many generations, and then those differences, those inherited differences, are going to be very pronounced in the 2 different populations. I.e., the populations evolve independently because they adapt to their environment separately, because those environments are different than each other. So, if the selective pressures or the environmental differences are much greater, then the differences between these 2 populations are also going to be much greater. That makes sense because if the environments were very similar, then that means the populations of these, for example, these boars, would also be very similar. But if the environments are very different, then the boars would also be very different because natural selection would say that different advantageous traits would be better in the different separated environments. Now, like I said before, over time, many different physical and behavioral changes in the populations are going to be very, very pronounced, okay? So maybe in the beginning, certain boars would be similar to the other ones, but then over time, they're going to become more and more different as they adapt to their very different environments. after a while, it's going to become so different, okay, that genetically, physically, and behaviorally, they will no longer be able to reproduce with one another, even if they are reunited and put back together, okay? They are now considered different species, and then that is when we can say that speciation has happened. Let's take a look at the example below here. You start off with an initial sample of fruit flies, okay? Then what happens here, okay? They are geographically separated. That's that first section right over here. A physical barrier separates the two different populations. Then, over time, what is going to happen? Maybe in this environment, in this experiment, they have given them starch to eat. In this other environment, they've given them maltose, a different kind of polysaccharide, to eat. Then what happens because of the differences in the environments, as well as take a look what happens with the colors of the fruit flies. They get brown over here. These ones get yellow. And what's going to happen? Mutations occurred to give them these different colors. Maybe it's because of, again, these different environments, okay? And then what happens over time is, these mutations become more and more pronounced as these mutated individuals breed with one another, okay? And as those differences accumulate over time because of all this interbreeding, okay, what happens? They become very, very different in their preferences for mating. And then we can say that they can also be considered two different species. There might be a little bit of interbreeding between the two populations if they were reunited, but it would be very, very rare. Again, why? Because the differences in the behavior, the physical traits, as well as the genetics would be so different. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Let's continue on. Now, you should be able to take points 1, 2, and 3 of allopatric speciation, okay? A physical barrier, number 1. Number 2, natural selection. And then finally, number 3, a long period of time, okay? You should be able to take all of that and apply it to Darwin's finches in the Galapagos Islands, okay? So this is going to be a test question online that I'm going to put on the online quiz, okay? The Galapagos Islands and Darwin's finches. We know that they all came from a common ancestor, okay? But how come all the different finches are so different, okay? Why are they all so different? Why did the new species arise? And to answer that, you're going to want to take a look at the geography of the Galapagos Islands, as well as these two notes that I put over here. Some islands had a lot of insects, other ones were abundant in fruit, some in nuts, and then others had a lot of cactus or cacti. Second note could be, some islands had mountains, some large forests, some neither, etc. So you're going to want to use all this information to answer that question. Okay, we're going to move on to part 2 of today's topics. We're going to be discussing a little bit about the rate of evolution, or how fast does evolution of a new species actually occur. There are 2 different theories on this. The first one we're going to be talking about is gradualism. This is a theory that, again, you can sort of understand this by the word gradual in gradualism. This is a theory that changes to species happen at very slow, or you could even say gradual, paces. Okay, you're going to get many intermediate forms in between maybe the beginning organism and the end organism, okay? And the fossil record actually suggests that whales did gradually evolve from actually land animals, which is what the word terrestrial means, land, okay, to water or aquatic organisms. So let's take a look at this. What does this picture tell us? Well, this is a whale skeleton over here. This is an older fossil of an ancestor, perhaps, of the whale. And then these are 2 fossils that sort of show, hey, this organism over here sort of looks like it can be in the water. It looks like it's streamlined for living in the water, okay? Predominantly aquatic, but it also still has these hands and feet that would allow it to be living on the land. So it's sort of in between this first organism and the whale. And then we have another one where it looks like, wow, it's evolving more and more gradually into an aquatic organism because it only has a little bit of real fingers or appendages on its limbs. It no longer has hind legs, even though it has these vestigial features. And then finally, over here, we have a whale that is very, very aquatic and is the culmination of these gradual evolutionary forms of these previous ancestors. Now, if the theory of gradualism was correct, right over here, we would expect to see way more fossils that show these minor changes over time. However, the problem is that's not always the case. Some species actually just suddenly appear with no intermediate forms, okay? There are no intermediate forms. So what does that mean? Maybe we need another competing theory. All right. So this is where the theory of punctuated equilibrium means. So punctuated, as you can sort of tell by the way I'm sort of saying the word, punctuated suddenly just happens, okay? So this is proposed by two different scientists at Harvard University. They said three things. Number one, many species actually evolve rapidly, very quickly in evolutionary time, not over a long period of time. It usually occurs in small isolated populations where intermediate fossils are rare. If intermediate fossils are rare, that means evolution shouldn't be able to happen, or maybe evolution didn't happen very quickly, or very slowly. It did happen very quickly. That's what I meant to say. Sorry, everybody. Number three, after an initial burst of evolution, the species are already well adapted, and then they do not significantly change over time. All of these words are very confusing unless we apply it to a picture. So, over here, on the right side, we have punctuated equilibrium, and then gradualism is on the left side, okay? So again, as review, gradualism says we have a common ancestor, and we have many intermediate forms before we have these two different species of butterflies, okay? So, gradually over here, oh, there's one intermediate form here that's more and more orange. It gets more and more orange as time goes on, and then finally we get the orange butterfly over here, okay? Or over here, you get less and less yellow, more and more white, etc., intermediate form, and then suddenly you get the white butterfly there, okay? Now, that's gradualism. Again, over time, it happens very slowly, and you have many intermediate forms. Punctuated equilibrium, on the other hand, says this common ancestor, okay, what happens? Oh, nothing really happens over time, and then suddenly, bam, you get a rapid evolution of this one species, and then that species stays the same over time, doesn't really change. That is punctuated because it happens very suddenly. There is no intermediate form. It just suddenly happened, okay? Same thing over here. The common ancestor keeps going. Bam! Suddenly it changes into the white and black butterfly over here. Were there any intermediate forms? No, there were none. And then that white butterfly stayed the same, etc. And then also the common ancestor just stayed the same as well. So again, you can compare and contrast these very well to each other. Alright, so that is how the rates of evolution may occur. It might occur very slowly and over time with many intermediate forms, or it might happen very suddenly and not have a lot of change over time at all. Now, these are going to be part 3 of today's lesson. It's going to be on the processes of evolution itself. So this is a separate point, not really talking about how fast it happens, but more about the actual processes of how it happens as well. Okay, so the first one we're going to be taking a look at for the processes of evolution, a little bit more on it, is going to be called divergent evolution. So divergent, okay, you can sort of say, oh, it sort of diverges away from each other, okay? It doesn't stay all clumped together. If you just take a look at what the word divergent means, this could help you. So this is going to be a specific term that refers to how one common ancestor, right over here, diverges and becomes and evolves many different species over time, okay? A classic example is, of course, Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands. And it's also called radiative evolution because, take a look, radiative is referring to the word radius. And what is a radius? It is, of course, that half part of the circle. And we have a circle right over here. Everybody loves math. Yay, yay, yay. Okay. So, this one common ancestor became all these different species by diverging in its evolution. Divergent evolution and the points for speciation are actually very similar, and we can even say that divergent evolution happens because of speciation, maybe even perhaps allopatric speciation. Whether or not divergent evolution was gradualism or punctuated, it really depends on which line of thought you prefer, or the situation for these Galapagos finches. All right, processes of evolution. The other one is going to be convergent evolution. Now, one quick note I want to put in here is convergent. So convergent and divergent evolution, even though they are different, they are not necessarily opposites of one another, okay? So don't think about the words, even though convergent and divergent are opposite words, convergent and divergent evolution are not opposites, okay? You're going to see that in the explanation over here. So that's a specific term that we were used to refer to how very different species, even though they are different species, they actually have similar features and they look similar. Okay? This is going to relate to an earlier part of chapter 5 where we talked about analogous structures. Structures that look similar and do similar things in very different species. Okay? So an example of analogous structures could be the fins and flippers of these very different species of sharks, which are fish, dolphins, which are mammals, and penguins, which are birds. All right. So it's, again, over here, it's by which unrelated species evolve similar physical features because, why? They have similar lifestyles, and again, that would be because of natural selection. Now, this is where you can see why they are not opposites of one another, okay? So divergent and convergent evolution can actually happen at the same time, or at least in the same evolutionary tree over here. So what we can say over here, in the very, very distant past, we had the emergence of vertebrata, okay, organisms with bones. What happened is divergent evolution caused the vertebrae to change their, or vertebrata, organisms to change their evolution into perhaps sharks, okay? And then also change into mammals, okay? So they would diverge into different species there. However, we could say that, mammals, some mammals live in the water, and then they could become dolphins. So divergent evolution over here as well. But when we take a look at sharks versus dolphins, we could say that even though they evolved divergently from vertebrata, they actually converged in their evolution because they share an aquatic environment and they have a same shape because of that. So you can actually put convergent and divergent evolution in the same evolutionary tree, but not always. So over here, you can ask yourself the question, if you are given these two examples, okay, these two examples over here, what kind of evolution are we going to be talking about? Are we talking about divergent, or are we talking about convergent? I am really bad at writing with a mouse. Please disregard. Okay? So you should be able to take a look at these two pictures and tell me which one is divergent and convergent, and that may or may not be a question in the future online quiz. All right, so that's it. A very short, short lesson this week because we're nearing the end. After this week, we only got 2 weeks left of school class, so we're just going to start slowing it down and getting you ready for summer. Task to be completed. Read page 157 to 161 in your textbook. Some practice questions you can work on. When it says prepare for the unit exam, that's not for you. That is for old, actual in-person what do you call it? Classes, so don't worry about that. All right. I think that's it. Good luck with the online quiz. Email me if you got questions. Maybe I'll see you in office hours. Mr. Law out. See you later. Sayonara. Capybara.